Good day, everybody, and welcome to episode 14 of What's on Your Workbench. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. 14 episodes. Wow, we're getting those numbers up. I was thinking about it. It's like, man, it feels like we've been doing this forever. And it's like, oh, there's only 14 episodes. Oh. And you look at those podcasts that have like 500 and you're like, oh my goodness, that's a commitment. But how are you doing, Chili?
I am doing just peachy. How about you?
Doing well as always. As always, we have myself, Andrew from Crafty Beetroot, and Chili from Allwood Solutions with us. And we will be talking about what's on our workbench. But first, how's your week been, Chili? Sounds like it's been pretty busy finishing off projects.
Yeah, it's been productive. I just delivered the flower stands actually this morning to a very, very delighted client.
Always good.
Who's very happy with them. So that was awesome. It's by far my favorite part of the entire process. I mean, I love building, I love designing, but seeing the look on a client's face when what they receive is miles ahead of what they were ever expecting. That's the greatest feeling. I love it.
Yeah. My favorite part of the project is when it comes off the page and it's like that first time it comes together, and it just fits and it looks how you imagined it in your head. When it does that, you just get that rush and you're like, need to do it again. And then you're like, no, I need to spend 5 hours finishing the project now and doing all the boring stuff. But
yeah, I don't get that really very much.
Okay.
When it starts to come together, I think it's because I'm a perfectionist and I'm hard on myself.
Oh yeah.
I expect like that what comes out is going to look like what's in my head better. If not, I get mad at myself.
Yeah, so you just have the down if it's not good enough. No, I'm like, I'm like, what? I'm just like, throw something in the fire and whatever pops out. I'm like, wow, that's way better than I was expecting. Who would have thought that would have done that?
Yeah. So other than that, not a whole lot going on. How about you?
It has been a week. So we've had a couple sick kids. So, they've been at home and that one hasn't slowed us down too much, but what did we see? Like last Wednesday, we had piano recitals for my two oldest. And then this Monday, my daughter had like a sharing dance thing. And then Tuesday, oh man, what was Tuesday? Tuesday was sports day and the boys were sick. And then on Tuesday night was the breakup of Girls Brigade for my daughter, which is kind of like a scouts. Then Wednesday was a recital for her choir. And then Thursday I had after dinner drinks at work, and it was just like, And then on top of that, there's what I'm going to be talking about this week, which have been kicking my butt all pretty well since about a week ago.
You got to learn to be like one of those like moms or grandmas who sits in the front row at those things with their like knitting or crochet, just does it while they're there. You just take the dress with needle and thread. Start sewing while you're watching.
I did contemplate taking the dress that I'm working on the bus, but I'm like, I've got to take an awl to like punch holes, and I'm like, people might not particularly like that on the train. They might start thinking things. I was like, I really can't do much if I don't have that particular tool, and it's just a whole thing. So shall we get into what is on our workbench?
Let's do.
Is it your turn or my turn to go first? I can't even remember.
I think technically mine. You threw me for a loop because you changed it up on me last week.
I think last week we changed it up. Well, let's change it up again and try and get it back right. So I'll go first because I want to talk about this and get it over and done with, because
I can't wait to hear about this.
I am not in the right headspace. I was like, this morning I was going for my run. I'm like, can I talk about anything else? And I walked into my workshop and my workbench is completely empty. And I'm like, yep, I have to talk about, the thing. So here it is. For those that are watching the video, look at this wonderful thing that is balled up and a mess, and there's pins all through it. And yeah, that is going to be a medieval dress for my wife, circa 1350s to 1370s. I was hoping for it to be more accurate, but my fabric that I ordered never showed up. So apparently Facebook Marketplace, has some questionable things, or when it's coming from another country, shipping can take longer than a month, apparently. So still got to figure that out. So this journey starts about a week ago. So I finished the podcast last week going, yep, this is the plan. And then I had to go find some fabric. So I actually found this really awesome little fabric store run by this just lovely old lady who I think mainly specializes in like dance costumes and stuff like that. But she just kind of picks up random fabric and kind of builds up a stock. And so I went around there for the first time, and I found this this fabric. It's not perfect. I was looking for a wool. This is a wool blend, but for what I need it for, it's quite good. It's a nice light fabric. It's kind of like, imagine a real light woolen sweater or a nice light woolen cardigan. So for my wife, it shouldn't be too hot, considering it's going to be full sleeve and stuff like that. But yeah, and then the fun began. And I actually decided to do something a little bit different with this one. Is I was like, I need this done by the end of the weekend. So if I put it on Facebook that it needs to be done by the end of the weekend, I'm committed. I have to do it. So that's what I did on Friday after work. I went, hey, everybody, I'm going to do this by the end of the weekend. Come along for the journey. And so I actually kind of live tweeted, for lack of a better term, photos of the project as it went through the weekend. And it actually had a pretty good response. People, I think, enjoyed that, just going, what is this guy doing? And doesn't look like it's going to end well. And so,
I know I enjoyed it. I thought it was awesome, since I knew it was coming. And then when I started to see you put pictures up and say, well, here's where I'm at, here's what I'm doing, I was like, this is ballsy. Like, you're either gonna do this or you're gonna fail in front of everybody. That's awesome.
Well, and I mean, a little bit of pressure never hurt anyone.
Yeah.
And I was like, because I felt I was under pressure anyway, I was like, well, let's have some fun. And I know, and a lot of people know that I'm doing this anyway, so I'm just like, whatever. I don't generally show in progress pictures. I generally try and just show the finished thing, because that way, if something doesn't get finished, it's like, hey, nobody knew about it, it's not a thing. But yeah, this one was committed. So I mean, yeah, Friday night I started working on the pattern. So when you're making dress patterns, being the expert that I am, you've basically got two options, right? You buy a pattern or find a pattern, and then you adjust it to the size of the measurements that your person has. And hats off to my wife. She's very lovely and very tolerant of me, because she'll just be in the middle of like doing dishes or making lunches or something, and I'll just walk up to her with a tape measure and start measuring things and be like, just lift your arm up, I've got to measure this thing. And so you get your initial measurements. With this one, I was following a tutorial off YouTube, and I was basically making my own pattern. Being a medieval type dress, there's a very specific kind of pattern to it, and it's quite common. And because these fabrics don't have any stretch, that pattern is fairly consistent, so I could use that as a guide. So that was the first thing, right? So I made up a pattern.
So you didn't just measure Miriam in her sleep like you did with the kids?
No, I only do that with the kids, because they don't stand still long enough otherwise. Yeah, so you come up with like basically some pattern, and then you transfer that to another fabric. And basically that's going to be, like we've talked about in previous episodes, that's going to be your template, it's going to be your prototype. And I was trying to get that as quick as I could done and sewn together, so that I could try that on Miriam, and I could then I could pin it basically to size. So that's what I did on Friday night, is I got it pinned down and I had it all ready to go to like version 2. And then my wife, who's been a little bit under the weather, she slept into midday on Saturday, and I was dependent on her to get to the next step. And I'm just like, all Saturday morning. And then eventually she got up and was like, oh, can I just put this on you? I've made some adjustments, and like, you know, trying to be all calm, like, oh, no, I've lost half a day. But anyway, so that got me to version 2 of the pattern. I took that off, cut that up, made adjustments again, and then I got to version 3. And then basically I transferred that to paper. And then I made up basically a bit like that's my guide. And then it was time to start cutting out the actual fabric. So by the time I actually got to cutting out the actual fabric, I think it was Saturday evening. And then sewing that, because obviously I've still got family. We went for like a bike ride, and you know, still had to make dinner and things like that. So yeah, by this point I was like behind schedule, and I was like, oh, this is going to be a nightmare. Because originally my plan was by Saturday I wanted the whole thing together, and then Sunday was just for finishing off, doing all the hemming and buttonholes and things like that, but already out the window. So yeah, Sunday came along. I had a busy morning with church, so I didn't get anything done in the morning. So in the afternoon again, I was busily trying to get the sleeves done, trying to get the liner done, because with a medieval dress like this, there isn't any support garments underneath, like there's no corset or bra or anything. Obviously my wife can choose to wear whatever she wants underneath, but originally they wouldn't have had that. So you need to basically kind of add some supporting material. So I had to find some linen that I had that I could use as backing. And then I got that on, and then I had to do the sleeves. And then that's pretty well where I finished it. So I got to the point where it looked like a dress. It's not by any means perfect at that point. And so then what I've been doing during the rest of the week is I've been doing a lot of the finishing work. So I've been working on the lacing down the front. So the lacing down the front has eyelets. Each of those eyelets is hand sewn. So it's basically a hand sewn buttonhole. And how many have I done? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. So I've done 28. And on average, they were taking me about 15 minutes to do each. So what's 28? That's like 7 hours of work, I guess. But yeah, so it's been a week. And then the last thing I've got to do, well, the last step I got to was doing the neckline. And so I actually made a bit of tape from some fabric. And where is it? Find the pins, Andrew. Find the pins. There they are. Yeah, and so I've got a nice thin edge, which has been machine sewn on, and then I'll hand sew the finish. Because so far, all of this has been machine sewn. But all of the finishing edges I do want to do hand sewn, because that will sell it to most people that, oh, that looks more authentic. If I do like a machine hem, it's going to be pretty obvious that I did it with a machine. While with a hand, it's going to sell that little bit better. I did want to do more of it hand sewn, but we'll just see how we go. Because the sleeves, I'm not 100% happy with the sleeves, but they might just be however they end up for Friday. And we'll just, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But we've given it a good go. But yeah, so it's not done. But this weekend, because when I was doing my maths on how many weekends I had to our medieval festival, I miscounted, and I thought I had an extra weekend in there, and that I was planning on having like an extra weekend just for kind of like miscellaneous finishing. So I've just lost that. So this weekend I need to work on my costume, which is 2 parts. So it's going to be a tunic with some pants, trousers, hose, whatever you want to call it. So that will be a bit of a challenge this weekend. I don't know if I'm going to be as candid with the live shots, but I might be, just to keep myself honest, because again, during lunch today, I'll be running to the fabric store, buying a whole bunch of stuff, and coming back home. As soon as 5 o'clock rolls around, yep, shut the laptop. Let's get into real work mode. So, but yeah, no, it's been a process. Dresses, I find, are like you've pretty well got all of the challenges of making a skirt and a top and somehow combining them. And then you throw in something like this where you're aiming to be supportive as well as maintaining shape, as well as making it look nice, as well as it's the whole thing. It's, you know, probably a bit beyond my skill level, but we will be able to take pictures that make it look good, which is always the goal.
Well, and you never expand your skills if you don't work outside of them.
Well,
Like,
exactly.
that's the only way to grow in your skill sets, is to push yourself outside of what you know.
And it's always easier. So next year, I have that option of, okay, do I just remake this one? Do I just modify this one? Do I just maybe pull a few seams and change it? Or do I make it a bit like, do I change the sizing on it? I've got something to work with, while starting from scratch it's not really my forte. I much prefer modifying or updating or changing rather than starting from complete scratch, which is effectively what I've done with this one, like complete pattern from scratch. Fabric was just a roll of fabric. So even to get to this point, I'm quite happy that I've made it this far, but yeah, it's definitely very nerve-wracking, because my goal is to make something that doesn't look like I made it. That's always kind of my goal. And then I always like there's basically the two things I want people to kind of look at when they look at my work, is be like, oh, that's like, that must have been done by a machine. But then when they look closer, they're like, well, there's no way a machine could have done that because it's so custom, you know. And then they're like, well, then how was that made, kind of thing. That's kind of the mindset I like people to kind of follow when they look at something I've done, is just be like, how did they do that? Oh, that crazy guy, how did he, the only way he could have done that is to spend 7 hours hand sewing eyelets.
That's so. First of all, I want to make sure I get this straight. So you went from paper to fabric to paper to fabric, right?
Yes. Yeah, it was
Okay.
actually paper to fabric to fabric to paper to fabric. So basically there were two mock-ups on fabric that I basically pinned. I cut it, I pulled it apart, transferred it to another piece of fabric. So there was actually two complete fabric mock-ups in the end. And then the final one.
So I guess, so for the paper, is that just like butcher paper, like big
Yep.
roll of fairly thin paper? Okay.
Yep.
I thought that's what it kind of looked like.
Yeah,
And then
it's the kids' craft paper
yeah.
that I stole, because they have
And then when you're doing your mock-ups, what fabrics do you use for that?
So for this one, I wanted to make sure it was a non-stretchy. So I had some other fabric from projects that I hadn't done yet. Excuse me.
Bless you.
Yeah, I had some fabric from other projects that were kind of earmarked for projects that I never did. And it wasn't fabric that was particularly expensive. It was new fabric. So it wasn't like, you know, I did have some old sheets out here in the shed that I was going to use, but I'm like, my wife probably won't be too upset with using basically rags that I've had out in the shed for a couple of years as my basis. But yeah, that's what I use, is just what I had. You can use like a muslin, like basically there is fabric that's like a cheap fabric, a couple dollars a yard, that you can purchase kind of with that in mind. But usually it's just, yeah, leftover fabric or some other fabric you've got lying around. But the important thing is you want it to be the same structure. So if it's stretchy, you want to have stretchy. If it's not stretchy, you don't want to have stretchy. And it's definitely one of those things where it's like, I didn't really want to have to cut up that fabric. But on the other hand, some of that fabric's been sitting there for a couple of years, and I'm like, well, I'm doing this now. So fabric that's never going to be used is no use to me anyway. So I might as well use it. But yeah.
And then what kind of fabric did you use for the liner?
So for the liners, linen. So, so you know how a couple of weeks back we talked about I made some underclothing.
Yeah.
Well, I actually ran out of the linen that I wanted to use. So you might be able to see it in the picture. So see the two types of linen.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, so I had this thinner stuff which wasn't as good, so I put that at the back, and then at the front I had the nicer linen, because underneath this obviously you're going to be wearing a full shift underneath, so it's not you don't really need it for protecting the fabric so much. It's more for just giving that extra support and just making it, because that wool blend isn't a really thick fabric. It's a fairly lightweight fabric. But yeah.
So this might be a pretty ignorant question because I've never done this. But in my mind, what I'm thinking is, would it be plausible to make your mock-ups out of the material you're going to use for the liner?
Yep.
Because then you'll have, like, just in my head, I'm thinking, well, then I'm going to have my liner material pretty much cut to what I need it to be already if I use it for the mock-up.
Yep, 100% you can do that. I did try and do that. The problem was I had so little liner material. I had to actually kind of like fit it onto that. Like I didn't have excess to kind of drape.
Yeah.
So this is something I learned watching the videos, is that like with dressmaking or generally dressing females, it's you use a technical draping where you basically just have them stand there and you just drape fabric over and pin it to where you want until you get the shapes and stuff you want. And that differs from what's tailoring. Tailoring is basically working off measurements. So traditionally, allegedly, based on my research, basically a tailor would have a tape, and on that piece of tape, they would make markings. So they would measure a person, and then they would basically store that tape in their records. So anytime that person came back or they wanted a new jacket, you go, oh, okay, and they would take that tape and they could make the full garment from that. Dressmaking isn't like that. Dressmaking is more getting the person, draping it over them, adjusting it to that fit, which is, yeah, something I never really understood the differences of and why. Because it's like you watch those like project runways and you're like, how the heck can they turn out, you know, a dress in a few hours? And that's how they're doing it, is you basically pin it, take it off of them, cut it, sew it, you're done, with some extra steps afterwards.
the tape used by tailors is one of those things that fascinates me, because it's very similar to some woodworking processes. Specific. So, like you said, there's not a lot of difference, you know, in a men's suit. Like, we don't really have a lot of options. You know, it's generally you're getting the same cut of suit. And so it's the same thing like when you're building, let's say, dining room chairs. So what a woodworker will do is create what's called a story stick. And it's got all your measurements of all the different parts and pieces of the chair on this one story stick. And you use that to transfer measurements onto your pieces of lumber and get them, you know, cut down in, you know, mass. So if I make a dining room set for a client and they come back to me, you know, 10 years down the road and say, hey, I want to turn this 6-person table into an 8-person table, you know, I can build the leaf out for it, and then I have my story stick to build 2 more chairs that are exactly like the 6 they already have. Yeah, that's interesting that to see that crossover between crafts.
And it makes a lot of sense, because you think back in the day there was no consistent inch, or, you know, there was no consistent measurement. So you literally just use the same, as long as you use the same measurement. And that's kind of how I work in my shop, is like, I don't really care if I'm using centimeters, inches, miles, you know, I just use whatever I've got right there. It's like, oh, it's the length of my phone, and then I'll just use that measurement. And it's like trying to explain to my children, because they're like in that stage at school where they're starting to learn about measurements, and, you know, and people are like, oh, metric system is so much better. And it's like, yeah, in some ways it is. But in my world as an engineer, you always have to display units. It doesn't matter whether you're measuring it by horse length or by meters or whatever. I need to know that it's meters or centimeters or millimeters or whatever. It doesn't matter if it's inches or whatever. You still have to understand that what it is the important part, not how you did it. So it's quite funny, because I'll be in a store and I'll be like, oh, I need like 20 inches of that, but I need 40 centimeters of that. And they're like, well, why don't you just, I'm like, well, the tape was there and whatever. It doesn't bother me. I don't.
The other thing I want to pick your brain about is these eyelets. So I know that like when I sew buttonholes on a machine, you sew the buttonhole.
Heathen.
I doing it by hand. No way, no how. So I sew, you sew both sides of the buttonhole on the flat fabric, and then you make the slit, after everything's sewn. And that's really all it is a slit in the fabric that you're creating. But with a eyelet like that, did you have to like punch out a circle? Or
so ideally when you're doing in fabric, you don't want to punch out a hole. You want to kind of work a hole into it. So you use like an awl or something like that, where you can basically poke a hole between the threads and then widen it and widen it and widen it. So that way you haven't upset the actual fabric weave, especially that close to the edge. And what I did for this one, because I know there was going to be quite a lot of force where those two eyelets get pulled, I actually put in because I doubled over the blue wool fabric, I doubled over my liner fabric, and then in my liner fabric, I actually added another piece of linen that I doubled over again. So there's actually 6 layers of fabric along that length that should hopefully give it quite a bit of strength. Kind of similar to how like on a corset, you've got the busk, and that's like a full metal piece, like 2 metal pieces that are brought together to give it that strength. So yeah, so with the eyelet, you effectively do it as a buttonhole, as a handmade buttonhole. But yeah, the difference is you use an awl and you punch your hole, or you don't punch a hole, you basically work a hole into it until it's the right size. And then I just do kind of like a blanket stitch around, and then you do a buttonhole stitch around. It's not making I've done quite a few buttonholes like by hand on some other jackets that I've done. It's actually one of those therapeutic things that I actually quite enjoy doing, because you can put like a movie on and you can just kind of sit there and work at it and get in the zone. But
you can.
Yeah. But yeah, so there's actually still some more to go, but I've done what I have to do. And now I'm like, okay, well, if I have time, I'll kind of go down a little bit lower, because I'm not 100% sure on how low that lacing needs to go. On some pictures, you see it go right down into the skirt, and then other ones you see are quite high. So depending on where it is, I'll go. But yeah, I almost ran out of fabric as well when I was making the skirt, or the dress, because I was like 3 meters, that should be enough. And then I've got very little scrap left over. Like if I have to redo the sleeves, which I think I might, I'm actually contemplating buying some more fabric today. Like I'd buy another 0.5 meter, just that way I'm covered if I need to redo it. But yeah, it's a thing.
Yeah. So the other thing I was pondering is, I know that on a number of period pieces I've seen, where the eyelets are and the enclosure to bring the dress together, I've often seen that strip where the eyelets go trimmed out in leather for structure. Is that a time period kind of thing, or is that a class amount of money to make your dress kind of thing?
No, I'm not really sure. I've never really heard of that. For especially on female on pieces. Normally, I've only ever seen fabric. So yeah, I'd be curious to see where that actually comes in, because the fabric is quite strong. Like I don't like leather it does wear differently, like for a belt or something like that, which has got a lot of abrasion. That's going to be better. But for dresses, and if it was my guess, I would say it'd be more of a lower class thing, to have that kind of system, to have that leather in there, because it's such a utilitarian fabric or material at that point. But yeah, no, I'm not aware of that in particular.
Yeah, I mean, for all I know, it may not even be historically accurate.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm interested at this medieval festival. Is I'm like, there's going to be a lot of people that you know, fantasy or mixing, you know, I'm wearing something from the 19th century and the 15th century, or, you know, there's a crusader with a Renaissance kind of thing. And I'm trying, basically my goal is I want to walk down past reenactors and then look at me and go, oh, he tried, he got it, kind of thing. That's like, I don't want them to be like, oh no, that's perfect, like you come over here, you might as well be doing this instead of us, because you know that's not realistic. But I want them to be able to look at it and go, okay, this guy's actually done some research, he's put in some effort, and it actually is correct for the most part. And they're going to be like, oh, the fabric's not 100%, or the stitching, like we can tell you did a bit on the machine or whatever. But for the most part, that's kind of my goal, is to be in that kind of sweet spot of like, okay, he's done some research, he's tried, he's missed the mark, but he knows where he's missed the mark. Because that's always the funniest thing when you're doing like a costume or something and somebody comes up and goes, oh, did you know that that's not 100% correct? And it's like, yeah, dude, I spent like 500 hours making this. I know everything about this, and I can tell you all of the little things that are wrong on this. How long have you got?
Yeah, I can't wait to hear how it's received at the Ren
Yeah.
Fest. That's gonna be awesome.
Yeah, it's gonna be, unfortunately, listeners, next week will probably be very similar to this one, except we'll be learning about all of the other painful things about making probably the pants or the trousers or the hose or whatever you want to call them, because from what I've heard, they're pretty well the most difficult thing to make. So I'm looking forward to that challenge.
Good thing you saved that for last when you're in crunch time.
Oh yeah, work under pressure. But anyway, enough about medieval sewing techniques and the hack trying them. What is on your workbench, Chili?
Well, what's on my workbench physically is stuff getting ready for my next project, which is a cribbage table.
Oh,
So it's essentially a massive cribbage board that is the whole tabletop, and it will have cup holders and storage in it for the cards and pegs and stuff like that. Like it's going to be pretty intense. None of it's terribly difficult, with the exception of the legs.
okay.
That's the part I'm still figuring out. I've been racking my brain trying to figure out what kind of legs I wanted to put on this, because it's actually a bistro height table. So 40
stool,
like 46 inch. Okay. Yeah. And that really changes the proportions and dimensions of the piece quite a bit. And so I thought about doing like a pedestal instead of 4 legs. Plus I'm trying to fit it into the architecture of my client's home and make sure it's not something that sticks out really awkwardly. So I started flipping through some of the reference materials I have. And I opened up this book called The Art of Making Furniture, which is one of the greatest books I've ever come across. And it's out of print by many a decade. If anybody goes looking for this, don't be surprised when you find it for like $250-$300, apparently.
Yeah.
But I inherited this, and it has it's broken up into sections of the house, basically. So there's the dining room, there's the kitchen, the bedroom, whatever. And each room is taken by a different craft worker, a different woodworker. And they talk about their approach to design and their kind of philosophy on craftsmanship, which is wonderful. And one of the sections is the garden or outdoor furniture by a gentleman by the name of Ashley Cartwright. And he's got some really awesome stuff. For those who are watching on YouTube, you can see these outdoor furniture pieces. And I really gravitated towards these crossed legs.
Yeah, so it's almost like a spiral. So imagine a straight leg that's going from one corner to the other corner, and then they're interlaced.
Exactly. So it's yeah, it's a very old, it's kind of a modernization of a very old tripod
Mm,
technique that was used for portable furniture, or another place you see it a lot is in really old examples of tripods for things like telescopes, like the very
mm,
earliest telescopes.
okay.
This was a manner of making a tripod that was really stable. It's also really similar to the way the structural beams are assembled for Native American teepees.
Yep.
It's the same kind of principles. But these ones are kind of refined in that it's not round poles that are lashed together, but instead it is the legs are rhombus shaped,
Yep.
and they actually join together and fit in a
Yeah.
tight configuration in the middle. Um, so I have been playing around with some very small pieces of scrap and turning them into rhombuses to
Mm,
figure out how I can fit these together to make my leg structure
yep.
work, because all of these tables that this gentleman has done are low top, 30-inch tall. And so my angles and dimensions are going to change
Yep.
in order to make that, bistro height table. I'm going to have to change some angles. And so I've got a page filled with uh, trig homework to figure out angles and stuff like that. And it's been really interesting to figure out how to do just the legs themselves, knowing that in the back of my head, the other thing I have to figure out once I get these legs established is how in the heck are they going to attach to the tabletop?
Mm,
Because the top itself is going to be one solid slab
yep.
of elm.
Is it
Um,
circular or rectangular or oval? What's the shape of a cribbage table?
um, it is roughly rectangular,
Okay.
not far off of square.
Okay.
Um, and it'll have, 2 out of the 4 sides will be live edge.
Okay. Yep.
So there's not really straight lines. I've
Yep.
got this really gorgeous piece of elm that came out of a tree in our front yard, actually. Um, and it's going to work gorgeously for this tabletop. But I have to figure out a way to attach these legs that allow for the movement that's going to happen in an outdoor table. I mean, any wood furniture moves, through seasons. You get expansion and contraction, and you have to account for slight movement in joints. An outdoor piece of furniture moves a lot
Mm,
because it's exposed to not only pretty drastic temperature swings, but also to moisture variation.
yeah.
I mean, you'll
Humidity.
have rain directly on this table.
Mm,
And here in Colorado, it's not uncommon to go from a low of 40 degrees, 48 degrees, let's say, to a high of 96 in
yep.
the span of 24 hours. That happens. That's a lot of stress on wood.
Yep.
Not to mention if it happens to be in direct sunlight, radiant heat gain is heinous.
Yeah. Well, and you
When
guys
you're
you can always even have snow and be, 10, 15 degrees up to 70 degrees, 80 degrees is pretty common as well.
yeah. So that's the part I still haven't figured out yet, is how I'm going to attach the top to the legs in a way that accounts for movement over time and
Mm.
make sure that we don't have things splitting apart.
Yeah, that's
So I'm having a wee quandary, but I we'll get there. We'll
yeah.
definitely get there.
Can you, looking at those little seats around that outside table, can you scale those up, because that's a fairly small top with, and then, like, if you made that higher, I assume that's kind of more like the process you're taking more than probably the table, which you'd have to
Yeah,
then
the
change the
the
dimensions.
The seat legs are, I have found, a lot closer
Mm.
to what I'm looking for. And the interesting thing that I really didn't think about initially when I was conceiving of this is if you look at the seat legs, where they join is um, is higher up. It's not halfway up like the
Yep.
tables are. It's a little above that halfway mark.
Which makes
And
sense.
yeah, it causes the legs to splay out a little bit further, which for a seat is great. It gives you better, stability in that seat. Um, but the problem is on a table, that's
Where
going to get in the way of your chair movement.
Yeah, I was going to
Um,
say, do you know the kind of chairs that will be going around it? Because I assume that
yeah, I
will
have
impact.
the client was gracious enough to send me pictures because they have an existing bistro table that they're moving and they're going to a new house. This will go with their new house. It's also a anniversary gift to her husband. So he doesn't know about it. He doesn't know this bistro table is going to get replaced, but they are going to reuse
The
the
chairs.
existing seats they have.
Okay.
So I got all those measurements, which was great.
And what kind of
Um,
chairs are they?
they are like wrought iron
Okay.
metal chairs.
So you
Very
weren't,
nice.
yeah, you weren't tempted then to go with like a wrought iron base?
I really don't want to because this is going on a deck that sits outside of the master suite.
Yep.
So it's not a very large deck. Um, Around this small balcony, it is a very rigid,
Mm,
vertical lined structure of white painted wood. And I didn't want something that blends into it too much, nor contrasts those lines too much.
yeah.
And wrought iron would be, I think, a little bit too dainty in size. It wouldn't hold up to the size of the railing.
Yep.
And just straight legs on the table was going to blend in too
Yep.
much to the existing structure. So I thought this was a nice contrast
Mm,
without being gaudy or out of proportion.
yep. And will there be 4 legs or is it 3?
There'll be 4.
4. Okay. Yeah.
So the one thing I've kind of pondered to this point is those legs are going to come up, and this will be cut at an angle
Yep.
to be perpendicular to the floor. I was kind of thinking that if I were to put some relief channels in the bottom of the table and attach some T-track into those channels,
Okay.
I could then use some T-nuts or T-studs to go through the top of the leg and attach,
Yeah.
so that I could tighten the table down enough that it's not moving, but it has that room to slide as it expands and contracts. That was
Yeah.
kind of my thought process so far.
Yeah. Because I guess my mind went to on the bottom of your table, basically having, 2 sections and then have something that the leg slots in between. And then you put like a nice big dowel through or something like that was kind of my immediate where my brain went. But yeah, like that would, you'd have a lot of risk there of, you still got to connect all of those bits together and then they could crack and you don't have much adjustment then.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, but it's going to be fun to play with and see what I can figure out.
Yeah, well, the nice thing is that once you've got it together, if you want to make those corners less jarring, you can then smooth it all out because you've got the basic structure. You're not tied to having that big monolithic. You can actually do shaping, but you just once it's together, then you're kind of free. But to get it together, you've got to have those kind of clean lines and angles and everything, and then you can go from there. But no, that sounds really interesting. And I assume there'll just be like kind of a big bolt through the middle, all 4 pieces. Is that kind of how it comes together, or?
Those will all dowel together.
Okay.
And they'll be hidden dowels, hopefully. because all four pieces don't come together at exactly the same point.
Yeah.
That defies the laws of physics.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of wiggle room there. So if I want to do hidden dowels that I'll join them together. I mean, it'll be a strong joint even if I just glue it,
Yeah. Just the
because
surface area.
it's all long grain.
Yeah.
So it'll be a really strong joint there. But I do want to put something in between there to provide a little bit more rigidity and help line things up as I'm doing assembly.
Yeah.
If I can't do that, I will probably do through dowels all the way through.
Yeah.
I don't think that would be the end of the world
Yeah,
to have those dowels showing.
I don't think that would look bad at all. I mean, if somebody's going under the table to look at it, then they're interested to see how it was made anyway. So
yeah,
that's what I do at parties, go under the table to see how it was made.
I don't say I really do that. I genuinely like when I'm somewhere, my wife gets annoyed with me because we'll go to like a restaurant or something and I'm like, wow, these tables are really cool, and I'm under the table.
So I have issues because I do it with clothing. I see and I'm just like, how did that seem? And then I'm just like, I'm staring at this person. This is not cool. I shouldn't be doing this. But I want to get that with painting. I'm still not there with painting, but I want to be able to look at a painting and be like, not look at what the painting is, but look at, okay, they painted that shape first with that color and they did this, and just, yeah, once you can kind of see the matrix and you can see the code, it's very fascinating. And this is what me and my wife do, and actually I've learned it from my parents, is you go to craft shows and you look at what other people made and you go, oh, I think I can make that, take a picture, or you buy one. Usually what I'd do is we would buy one as kind of like the template and then go home and make 20 of them or whatever.
Yeah, the only problem with that for me is that once you can see that matrix, you can't unsee it.
Yeah.
It's almost, and that the one that really ruined it for me was doing theater in high school, and I learned a lot of the tech side of it too, and stage lighting and sound and stuff.
Yeah.
And I cannot go to a stage production anymore without just absolutely picking apart what they're doing for lighting and how things are set up. And like, it has ruined the theater experience to a large degree for me.
Yeah, I must admit, sometimes when I'm watching movie, I do get a little bit taken away. Like, oh, I wonder how they made that prop. Or they must have done this, or they did this costume like that. Or that's definitely hand sewn buttonhole. That's good effort there. And I mean, most of the time, I think it enhances the experience because it's kind of the difference between watching like a football match and knowing what's going on and watching a football match and not knowing what's going on. You're like, oh, cool, they won the game. That's cool. But when you actually know, oh no, they did this, and this to get to that point.
Yeah.
But yeah, it can be, if things aren't done with much effort or much love, that's when it's like, I don't mind if something's not like professional, because I mean, you've met me, but it's that if they've got that heart in it and that love and that enthusiasm, like you can tell that they've gone all out, and that's what I always like to see.
Yeah,
for sure.
But yeah, it's I just find I have to rewatch things sometimes because I will get so lost in it that I realize I've missed key plot points.
Yeah.
I have no idea what's going on.
Yeah, my wife would be like, oh, this is going to happen and that's going to happen. I'm like, how did you know that? And she's just like, well, I was watching the movie and it's pretty obvious. I'm like, oh, okay. I was just watching that cool scene and I thought it was cool. And awesome. Oh, that's great. I'm looking forward to seeing this, because that's going to be quite a few little bits and pieces on that table, I think, as that comes together.
Yeah,
it's going to be good.
So if people are jonesing for more crafty beetroot until our next podcast drops, where can they find you, Andrew?
Nowhere. I am in lockdown, sewing like a madman. No. As always, craftybeetroot.com. I have a whole swathe of projects, going from how to make a cat's tail for a preschooler's costume through to replicating costumes and whatnot. There's blogs there, there's links to videos. all those links go to my YouTube page. There's lots of stuff on there as well. I think there's like 40 or something videos, something crazy, ranging from some of the first I made, which was woodwork, all the way up to the most recent costumes and other random things like making a guitar case. How about you, Chili? Where can people find more of you?
If you were just itching to see more of the goodies that come out of WOYWBE Solutions, you can find me on Facebook at WOYWBE Solutions or Instagram at OrwoodCS. You also get little bonus things like the posts I put up for Tater Tuesday. Tater is my shop dog, and he gets adorable pictures put up from time to time. If you obviously, if you're listening to this, you probably already know where to find it, but you can always find this podcast on all of your favorite podcasting platforms. Just search for What's on Your Workbench.
Yep. And we're also on YouTube, and the home of the podcast is what'sonyourworkbench.podbean.com. So with that, we will find out next week what's on your workbench.